Lord, save us! That was the desperate cry echoing through Palo Duro Canyon when the entire SEAL team was trapped in a storm of gunfire. The radio was dead, every escape route blocked, and each man knew death was only seconds away. But just as their faith collapsed, a single shot rang out from a crack in the rock no wider than an inch. No one saw the sniper, no one knew who she was, but that shot changed everything. In their eyes, Katarina Hayes was nothing more than a stray shadow. A brown-haired girl with a voice that carried both Eastern Europe and South Texas, she appeared at the Amarillo training base like an outsider. She didn't wear a uniform, just a faded hoodie, old shoes caked with desert dust. As she walked through the gate, young soldiers whistled, smirked, and laughed among themselves. One tossed out a line into the dry air. A sniper from a movie? Or cosplay? No one knew her real background. The paperwork said only, civilian observer, volunteer. In Texas, at the heart of the U.S. military, Katarina was treated as excess, a shadow moving across the drill field, carrying with her a cold gaze no one could understand. Every morning, while rows of American flags whipped bright against the blazing sky and young soldiers shouted in rhythm through push-ups, she would choose a corner in the shade. There, she sat still, watching like someone standing outside a boundary. That old gray hoodie didn't belong in the strict scene, and it only made her more of a target for laughter. Their laughter wasn't cruel but sharp as a paper cut. It sliced quietly into the skin, leaving marks deeper than any blow. People often judge one another by surface appearance, and in the U.S., military, uniformity of image often decided value. Katarina seemed unbothered, or at least, outwardly she never showed it. Her gray eyes only followed the Texas sky where flocks of falcons sliced through the air, aligned, never a bird out of rhythm. That gaze was quiet, as though she saw something beyond what ordinary eyes could catch. In the mess hall, she always sat at the last table. Before her, a metal tray, a few pieces of dry bread, a cup of black coffee gone cold. The noisy chatter about rifles, shooting scores, or the cute bartender in Amarillo never reached her corner. Occasionally, someone glanced her way and shook their head, like watching a character who'd wandered out of the script. Perhaps the only thing that caught their attention was her gait. Not light, not hurried, but firm, economical. Every step seemed measured. Old shoes, but each stride landed steady, never half a beat off. One soldier once joked, "If she walked a tightrope, she'd be steadier than me on solid ground." The whole table roared. But anyone with sharper eyes might have noticed. Katarina never sat with her back to a door. Whether in the canteen, on the training field, or in the lounge, she always picked a spot where she could see every exit. And those gray eyes, which looked distracted, never really missed a thing. That was Katarina's present world. A canvas painted with the noise of young soldiers and the silence of herself. To outsiders, it looked off-key. A young woman with no rank, no role, placed in one of America's most elite bases. The question hovered around the barracks. Who is she? Why is she here? No answer came. Or maybe Katarina chose not to give one, because her silence seemed to hold more than any explanation ever could. But silence could not stop suspicious eyes. When she walked into the shooting range, a few soldiers exchanged mischievous looks. They no longer called her Sniper. They had another nickname, Cosplay Girl. They thought the joke harmless, but a joke, repeated over and over, can cut deep. Every American soldier knows that, and yet sometimes they forget, letting laughter turn into a knife. Katarina kept her rhythm unchanged. Each morning she crossed the training yard. Each afternoon she disappeared toward the canyon's edge. Where she went, no one knew. Some said she climbed the rocks and sat for hours, just to watch the sunset paint the valley red. Maybe, or maybe she was searching for something else. The outside world still treated her like a shadow, but that shadow, surely, was hiding another shape. Because no one can remain just an observer in the life of Navy SEALs in the middle of the Amarillo Desert forever. And one day, a situation would come, one strong enough to force the entire base to ask itself, this shadow, who is she really? But the sharp-eyed had begun to notice. She didn't speak much, but when the wind shifted, Katerina always pulled up her hood, stealing a quick glance at the small compass tucked in her pocket. Passing by the armory, her fingers brushed the barrel of an MK 13.300 Winchester. Her eyes flickered for an instant, then she let go as if nothing had happened. On her left wrist, half hidden, was a tattoo, an inverted V, framed by the numbers, the 16th of July, 2003. No one could explain it. No one dared to ask. One night in the mess hall, the murmurs rose again. A couple of young soldiers nudged each other, laughing between bites. "What's she even doing here?" one whispered. "Maybe somebody's ex-wife," another cut in. "Then why does she check the wind better than the ballistics expert?" The question dropped into silence. No one answered. Katerina remained still, chewing dry bread as though she hadn't heard. But the hand on the table tightened slightly. At sunset, she would vanish from the base. Some swore they saw her climb up to the rim of Palo Duro Canyon, sitting for hours just to watch the last light paint the cliffs in red. A few laughed, calling it a drifter's habit. But others began to wonder, was it a ritual? Sitting alone in the wind and sand, back against the stone, those gray eyes weren't just admiring the view. They were measuring, calculating, memorizing. Hawks circled above. The wind shifted every second. The light changed constantly. She observed it all, quietly, steadily, not for amusement, but as if preparing for something. At the training ground once, a young soldier's rifle jammed. He fumbled, face flushed, sweat pouring, while his buddies burst out laughing. Katerina passed by, saying nothing. She simply reached out, flicked the safety, twisted slightly, pulled. The round popped free. It took less than 5 seconds. The group fell silent. One forced a laugh. Well, lucky the cosplay girl saved the gun. The laughter was thin, uneasy, but in a few eyes. Curiosity sparked, because no one had ever taught that skill to a volunteer observer. And then, during a night shooting exercise, the wind shifted suddenly. Wind flags snapped. The officer in charge hadn't even reacted. Katerina, standing outside the line, shook her head. A young SEAL fired. His round went wide. She picked up an empty paper cup, set it down, nudged it gently east. That was all. The next shooter adjusted. His shot landed center mass. No one spoke, but several eyes lingered on her. Bit by bit, these small details wove into a net of mystery. The strange tattoo, the way she moved, the precision in every gesture, as though her body had been trained to adapt to ballistics, to wind, to terrain, things no ordinary person could learn in days. A veteran officer, watching her handle a rifle during inspection, muttered aloud, "That's not the movement of a rookie. That's habit. And that habit only comes from years of living with a weapon." But Katerina stayed silent. Silent when mocked. Silent when gossip spread through the barracks. Silent even when certain glances shifted from scorn to suspicion. That silence, instead of making her smaller, only made her harder to grasp. Like a void in a noisy room. The emptier it was, the more people tried to fill it with rumors, with guesses. One night, Texas winds howled, whipping sand across the base. Young soldiers crowded into the rec room, playing cards, voices loud. Katerina sat in the corner, back against the wall, eyes on a worn sheet of paper. No one saw clearly, only a smudge of red stamped on the edge. Someone walking past caught a glimpse of shaky handwriting. Fallujah, 2003. He froze, ready to ask, but Katerina lifted her gaze, a stare cold as steel, sharp enough to swallow the question whole. As night deepened, so did the rumors. Some said she had served in the Middle East, but her records were erased. Others swore an old officer once spoke of the girl with the shot through the wall crack. And the younger ones? They chose the easy way laughter. If she's really that good, why's she sitting here eating cold bread and Amarillo? The room erupted. Everyone laughed. Everyone except one, the one who had seen her eyes on that page. Eyes that could never belong to an outsider. The day of the decisive drill arrived. The chosen terrain was Palo Duro Canyon. Its deep red gorge, stretching over 100 miles, cliffs rising like fortress walls, every bend capable of hiding a trap. The SEAL team stepped into the canyon. Their boots ground against the red earth, fine dust rising, clinging to collars and cuffs. The Texas noon heat radiated back from the stone walls, heavy as an invisible barrier. Katerina walked in silence at the rear of the formation, her pace neither hurried nor slow, steady as a clock. A young soldier flicked on his radio to test the frequency. A dry crackle hissed, then silence. The screen flashed a chilling message. Signal jammed. She whispered softly, "It's a trap." No one heard. Or perhaps, no one wanted to believe. 5 minutes later, an explosion ripped the valley open. Live rounds began to rain down from the cliffs. Stone shattered, fragments glittering in the sun like metallic rain. Machine gun fire echoed from 3 directions, the canyon's reverberation masking where the enemy truly was. The SEAL team was trapped in the heart of the killing ground. Their retreat blocked, radios dead, leaving only the sound of ragged breaths and pounding hearts. A lieutenant shouted, his voice breaking in the chaos, "Radios down! No way out!" Cold sweat streamed down every brow. A young soldier gripped his M4, finger trembling on the trigger, lips spilling a desperate whisper. "Lord, save us." In that chaos, Katerina raised her head. Her eyes showed no fear. Instead, they glowed like a night scope, cold, clear, terrifyingly focused. Stones splintered around her, bullets hissed like an angry swarm, yet her face never flinched. She dropped to a knee, slid along the rock face, seeking cover. Every move was unsettlingly precise, without hesitation. Her body reacted as if it had rehearsed this very scenario countless times, as if the canyon was not a trap but her own private training ground. A young SEAL turned his head and caught a glimpse. In that flash, he no longer saw the cosplay girl they had mocked. He saw the figure of someone who had survived the razor's edge between life and death. Gunfire thundered without pause. The cliffs roared back, amplifying the chaos into a long growl. The SEALs clustered together, each hugging a slab of stone, muzzles spitting rounds blindly at shifting shadows. But the enemy's fire was dense, coordinated, as if they had been waiting for them all along. In the frenzy, Katerina pulled her hood tighter. Dark brown hair slipped free, and the Texas sun glinted off the faded tattoo on her wrist. The inverted V, the numbers the 16th of July, 2003. What they had dismissed as meaningless ink now shone like a mark of fate. She glanced at the wind, drew a long breath, and slid her pack off her shoulders. Inside wasn't a map or water. It was an MK-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, the SEAL's own trusted weapon. No one knew how she had brought it in. She unlocked it with frightening ease. Her fingers moved across the stock like a musician brushing the strings of an old instrument. The steel's chill seeped into her skin, waking something in her. Katerina flattened against the hot stone. Scope pressed to her eye, breath shortening. Through the glass, the world shrank to a 3-inch V-shaped gap in the cliff opposite. There, a commander's silhouette flickered. He clutched a handheld radio, barking orders, orchestrating the ambush. All the fire raining down on them was born from his commands. Katerina whispered into her own breath just one line. Not a prayer, not a promise. Just one round. The rifle cracked, sharp and clean as a blade. For an instant, the canyon held its breath. The commander froze, eyes wide, then crumpled behind the narrow V-slit, an opening that seemed impossible to hit. The bullet had found its path, slicing through the searing air, crossing nearly 900 meters, striking true. The seals went still. For a few seconds there was only the whistle of the wind through stone and the faint tang of gunpowder hanging in the air. Then, like dominoes, the enemy's fire faltered. Bursts thinned. Some broke from their positions. The shouted orders vanished. A way out began to appear. Under the stunned gaze of her teammates, Katerina stayed prone behind the rifle, eyes unchanged. She pulled off her ear protection, slipped an empty casing into her pocket. A simple gesture, but one that felt like a ritual, keeping a token from an unrepeatable moment. No one in the team spoke yet, but in the silence of the canyon, a truth had already carved itself into their minds. The woman they had scorned had just saved them all with a single shot. She crawled up the rock face, her back scraping against the red gravel. Each sharp edge bit into her skin, leaving silent scratches, but none of it slowed her. From her pack she drew something no one expected. The MK-13 Mod 7, a standard SEAL sniper rifle. Yet its polished barrel and hand-tuned wooden stock bore the marks of someone who had lived and nearly died with it. No one knew how she had brought it with her. It wasn't on any equipment list. But at the razor's edge between life and death, the rifle fit into her hands like a limb, as if it had been with her long before this SEAL team even existed. A young SEAL, his voice cracking in panic, hurled the question into the air. "What's the range?" Amid the shriek of bullets, Katerina answered, her voice low, steady, without a flicker of doubt. 920 meters, 33-degree angle, 7-knot headwind. The team fell silent. The wind gauge was broken. The radio was dead. The electronic compass jammed. Yet she delivered numbers with an icy precision no one could explain. They only knew that in those gray eyes, everything seemed to have already been calculated. She pressed her shoulder to the ground, cheek against the rifle stock. One inhale, one slow, measured exhale, as if pre-programmed. Through the scope, the image sharpened. An enemy commander, half his body hidden behind a narrow V-shaped gap no wider than a hand. He was still shouting, still directing fire, convinced his position was untouchable. Katerina whispered just for herself. "Just one round." Her finger tightened. The rifle cracked short, clean, distinct from the chaotic symphony of hundreds of other shots. It rang like a single note meant to end the entire piece. In that instant, the canyon held its breath. The commander jerked, his radio slipping from his hand. His body crumpled backward, collapsing behind the V-shaped rock slit, an opening no marksman dared imagine striking. One bullet. Enough to change everything. For several seconds, the SEAL team was absolutely silent. Even their pounding hearts seemed to halt. Then they heard something strange. The enemy's fire breaking rhythm. Bursts became ragged, confused. Shadows abandoned their posts, retreating into crevices. Orders vanished with the fallen commander. An opening appeared. The path, once sealed tight, now split open like a crack in the desert. Katerina remained prone behind the rifle, her breath steady, even. She removed her ear protection, then slipped an empty casing into the pocket of her hoodie. A simple gesture, yet almost ceremonial. As if each bullet, if it mattered enough, would be remembered by a single artifact. A reminder that lives had been traded for one pull of the trigger. The SEALs still hadn't recovered. In their eyes, the shadow they once mocked now stood in a completely different light. No longer the out-of-place cosplay girl. No longer the one eating stale bread in the corner. But someone who had done what no one else imagined. Turned an ambush on its head with a single shot. Pebbles still trickled down the cliffside. The Texas winds still howled. But the air within the team had shifted. Shock gave way to realization. Realization to awe. Awe to silence. A silence unlike any before. The silence of respect. Katerina sat up, brushed the red dust from her hoodie. Her eyes remained cold, yet deep within them lay a weariness one only found in those who had lived too long with the ghosts of war. It wasn't shown through gasps or complaints, but in a gaze that had seen too much to still be surprised. And somewhere in every soldier's mind a question rang out, unspoken, heavy, inescapable. If she can do this, what else don't we know about her? The bullet cut through the 3-centimeter rock gap. The enemy commander dropped instantly. The entire SEAL team held its breath. The moment froze between the whistling wind and the red stone. Then, like a miracle, the enemy's fire fell into chaos. Shots sputtered, positions abandoned. The noose tightening around the canyon snapped open, revealing a path of escape. A SEAL lieutenant, his face streaked with red dust and sweat, stammered, his voice uncertain. That shot. Impossible. Katerina didn't answer. She only removed her ear protection, then slipped an empty shell casing into the pocket of her faded hoodie. A small gesture, but one that felt like a ritual repeated many times in her life, keeping proof of decisive moments. The enemy's gunfire grew thinner. The SEALs seized the chance, swapping magazines, pouring fire on the stragglers. The balance had shifted. They were no longer prey trapped in a canyon, but hunters, advancing step by step with purpose. Katerina didn't charge forward. She pulled back a few meters, choosing a higher ridge, her eyes still sweeping the horizon. To her, the bullet just fired wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Experience had taught her that the enemy never vanished entirely after the commander's death. There would always be someone reckless enough to stay, desperate for one final stand. And she was right. From the north, 2 bursts of machine gun fire erupted. Bullets chewed the earth right at the SEAL's boots. One young soldier nearly fell, yanked back at the last second by a teammate. A half-second slower, and they would have been trapped again. Katerina adjusted her scope, her eyes tracking the curl of smoke rising from the gunfire. A figure flickered behind shattered stone. Without a word, she fired. The second shot struck true, snuffing out the machine gun nest like a candle flame. The SEALs began to move. Close together, they slid down the slope, scrambling across jagged rock. Their chaotic heartbeats now beat in unison. Survival. As the men ran, Katerina stayed in the shadows behind them. No one asked her to, but her silent presence steadied the backs ahead, as if they knew an unblinking eye guarded them from the rear. A sudden gust tore through the canyon. Dry leaves and red dust swirled in the air. In that haze, the inverted V tattoo on Katerina's wrist glinted for an instant. A young soldier saw it, hesitated, then shook his head and kept running. He didn't dare ask. Not now. When they finally cleared the canyon's choke point, the space widened. Enemy gunfire had gone silent. In its place, only the howl of the wind through stone and the ragged human breathing remained. The team collapsed to the ground, sweat soaking their shirts. Some laughed not from joy but from the shock of escaping death. Short, rasping laughs, the body's way of releasing tension. One soldier raised a hand toward Katerina, but no words came. His eyes said it for him. If not for her. Katerina sat apart, her back against a boulder, removing her gloves. Her hands were rough, scarred in ways no fabric could hide. From her pocket she drew a small cloth, carefully wiping the rifle's barrel. The motion was slow, almost meditative. For her, this wasn't a moment of glory, it was maintenance, making sure the weapon was ready for whatever came next. The SEAL lieutenant, the one who had cried out in despair minutes before, looked at her again. To him, the strangeness wasn't just in the shot. Stranger still was her calm afterward. As if Katerina had lived this moment countless times, until it felt routine. He said nothing, just swallowed hard, and turned away. But the team knew, from this moment, they would never see Katerina the same way again. Above, Texas skies drew clouds across the Sunday. The light shifted, painting the cliffs red, as if drenched in blood. In that setting, the image of a young woman in a faded hoodie, quietly cleaning her rifle beside an exhausted SEAL team, became the strange emblem of the entire drill. No introduction, no medal, but what she had done went far beyond any training. News of the shot spread like fire in the wind. Within hours, from the Amarillo training grounds to the mess hall, from the barracks to the technical wing, everyone was talking about the bullet through the 3-centimeter gap. No one could believe it. No one thought such a thing could happen during a drill, on American soil. But they had all witnessed it. And the name tied to that shot, Katarina Hayes, suddenly became the center of attention. A day later, under a Texas sky so blue it burned the eyes, the base stirred with commotion. A command vehicle rolled down the dirt road, red dust rising in clouds. The man who stepped out wasn't just another field officer, it was General Michael Harris, regional commander, a figure most young soldiers only knew through the radio. He walked straight to the training field, where Katarina was cleaning her rifle barrel at the edge of the grass. The SEAL team stood waiting, back straight, but unable to hide their tension. The general stopped right in front of her. In silence, he raised his hand in a standard salute, a gesture even lieutenant colonels rarely received. His voice carried, clear and firm. In my records, the name Hayes appeared once in Fallujah, 2003. A female sniper supporting special operations, never officially recognized. The shot today could only be yours. Silence fell. The young soldiers who had once whistled and mocked now lowered their heads, avoiding her gaze. Some whispered apologies so soft only the wind could hear them. The jokes of cosplay girl repeated so often, now cut like scars they no longer wanted to recall. Katarina stood tall. She didn't respond, didn't smile. Only her gray eyes glimmered faintly, a flicker that died out as quickly as it appeared, like embers in a cooling fire pit. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the base shifted. In the mess hall, the seats around her were no longer empty. On the training grounds, the glances cast her way carried curiosity and respect instead of disdain. Cautious questions arose. How did you read the wind when the gear was dead? Why exactly 920 meters? But Katarina chose silence. This time, her silence wasn't seen as strange. It became a mystery that drew people closer. One evening, on the internal bulletin board, someone pinned an old photo taken in Iraq, 2003. The image was blurry, but in the corner stood the faint figure of a woman in body armor, hair tucked beneath a helmet. Beside it, a handwritten caption, Fallujah, the 16th of July, 2003. The date matched the tattoo on Katarina's wrist. Rumor was no longer rumor. It had become evidence. General Harris, in a short briefing with the officers of the entire base, said only one line. Never underestimate the one standing silently at the end of the line. That sentence was repeated for days afterward, almost becoming a motto. On the training range, young soldiers drilled with their M4 seconds. Amid the crack of gunfire, some stole glances toward Katarina sitting apart, cleaning her rifle, never intruding. A few of them, instead of laughing, began adjusting their stances to mirror hers, and they hit closer to the mark. A new joke appeared, this time with a different tone. Just copy cosplay girl, you'll shoot better. But now, no one mocked. The laughter that followed was lighter, almost a quiet way of admitting the truth without saying it outright. Some nights, when the moon hung over the canyon's rim, a few soldiers sat silently near Katarina. They didn't dare ask about her past. They just wanted to sit close, because her presence somehow made them feel safe. The stories around her slowly changed tone from, "What's she doing here?" to, "Maybe we should learn from her," from the stray shadow to a living legend. Katarina neither resisted nor embraced it. For her, recognition was never the goal, but the faces that once sneered now lifted with a different light in their eyes. That was its own form of justice. Sometimes, acknowledgement doesn't come with a medal. It comes with silence, with the change in how others look at you, with the slow bow of those who were once arrogant. At night, when everything settled, she opened her pocket and drew out the 2 empty shell casings she had kept. Her fingers touched the cold brass. She didn't smile, didn't weep. But the tension in her face seemed to ease. just slightly. Perhaps for the first time in many years, she no longer felt like a shadow. 2 weeks later, the Texas sky was heartbreakingly blue. At the cemetery of Amarillo, the memorial took place quietly, but with solemn grace. The wind still came from Palo Duro Canyon, carrying red dust and the dry scent of sunburned grass. Among the rows of white-draped chairs, one row stood apart. A small plaque on the seats read, "Reserved for those without names but who kept their brothers alive." No one read it aloud, but everyone who passed paused for a moment. On the stone memorial, a new inscription had been carved. The 16th of July, 2003, still here. A number, a date, a symbol most Americans would not understand. But for those who had been at Fallujah, it carried more weight than any monument. Katerina arrived late, still in her faded hoodie, old shoes dusted red. She walked slowly, unpretentious, not seeking attention. Yet paradoxically, that silence drew every eye her way. In her hand she held something small, clutched tightly. A shell casing from the Mk-13, the bullet that had turned the tide in the Death Canyon 2 weeks before. She said nothing. She did not bow long. She simply placed the casing on the stone, right beneath the line, the 16th of July, 2003. Then she gave a small nod. A nod enough to close a chapter, but not to end it. The memorial grounds were utterly still. No more mocking laughter like the kind that had once echoed at Amarillo Base. No more skeptical looks, no whispers of ridicule. Only silence, the silence of respect, of remorse, and of a new awareness. A few young soldiers, those who had once joked the loudest, now stood at a distance, hands clasped, heads bowed. No one told them to, but the change in their eyes spoke the truth. They believed. General Harris was there too. He gave no speech, pinned no medal. He simply stepped close, stopped behind Katerina, and kept silent. In this moment, silence was stronger than any praise. In the distance, the wind cut through the canyon, carrying a sound like a whisper. Some lifted their heads, listening as if it were the voices of the fallen, calling back from the past. Katerina stepped away from the stone. She did not take a place among the honored seats, nor stand in the circle of cameras. She chose a far corner, beneath an old oak tree, where the shade covered half her face. But even there, the eyes followed her. Not out of curiosity, but out of gratitude. The ceremony ended with a quiet gesture. A young SEAL lieutenant, the one who had once cried out, "Lord, save us," in the canyon, walked up to the stone. He placed down a silver coin the kind soldiers keep as keepsakes in their breast pockets. Then he stepped back, eyes on Katerina, but said nothing. The silence stretched. And in that silence, every small act became a ritual. A shell casing, a coin, an inscription carved in stone. Together they formed a symbol, a legacy more alive than any speech. The wind rose again. Red dust swirled and settled, covering the stone, but the words, the 16th of July, 2003, still stood out. Katerina glanced at it, her eyes softening, losing their usual sharpness. Perhaps, in that moment, she realized she no longer had to carry the memory alone. At the base, the story of Katerina kept spreading, but now it wasn't only about a single shot. It had become a story of recognition, of respect for a shadow once forgotten. Young soldiers began to mention her name during training as a legend to follow. And gradually, the inverted V tattoo on her wrist, once mocked, was drawn by some onto their caps as a silent tribute, no longer a mark of mystery but a symbol of trust. Katerina left the cemetery as the sun dipped west. Her shadow stretched long across the red earth, merging with the rows of white headstones. Her faded hoodie rippled in the wind, seeming like a flag of her own, not tied to a nation nor a unit, but carrying the weight of a truth finally recognized. She walked on, neither hurried nor slow, as if other journeys still awaited ahead. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.